Hey guys, Mr. Jurassic Finn here. Coming at you with some reproduction and genetics notes. He's not too interested. But we are finished now with our homeostasis unit. We're going to be moving on and starting our reproduction genetics unit next. So I'm going to be starting today just with a little bit. This unit, what we're going to do is talk about a type of cell division called meiosis and talk about what that is, why it's necessary in reproduction, and then we're going to move and talk a little bit about human reproduction, and then we'll move into our discussion of genetics. So that's sort of where we're going here. So to start today, I want to just quickly review something we studied a while back, and that's mitosis. So mitosis is one type of cell division, and mitosis is cell division that happens to make identical copies of cells. Big yawn. Sorry, I got distracted there. But mitosis happens when new cells are needed for growth or for repair, and basically cells just make copies of themselves. And so what I have here is just a review of the phases of mitosis. And if you remember, in mitosis, in the beginning stages before mitosis even happens, the DNA copies itself. In prophase, it condenses to form the chromosomes. Okay. And then what happens in metaphase is those chromosomes line up, single file, right down the middle of the cell. And then the two halves of each chromosome get pulled apart. In anaphase, they get pulled to opposite ends of the cell, and then eventually a new nucleus forms in telophase, and the cell itself splits. All right, he does not like this. There you go, Finn. So that's mitosis. Identical copies of cells are produced. It maintains the same number of chromosomes. So in humans, a skin cell that starts with 46 chromosomes produces two cells. They also have 46 chromosomes, so it maintains chromosome number. So we're going to be talking today about meiosis, which actually reduces the number of chromosomes by 1/2. So meiosis is cell division that reduces the number of chromosomes by 1/2, as I just said, and that's important to produce specialized cells that are called haploid cells or gametes. So typically for an organism to grow taller, to repair damage, those new cells that are produced through mitosis. In living organisms, the only time meiosis is ever necessary is to produce specialized reproductive cells called gametes, sperm cells, egg cells, the cells in pollen and ovules in plants. And so in order to do that, in order to cut the number of chromosomes in half, the cell splits in a little bit different way for meiosis. So we're going to be talking a little bit about how that happens here. Okay, we got our guest seat in the background. That's Alyssa. She's making some breakfast. I'm recording in our kitchen. That was probably a bad idea, but that's okay. So in meiosis, some parts are similar to mitosis, some parts are different. And we'll talk about some of those differences here today. So the names of the phases in meiosis are the same. They're interphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. But in meiosis, each of them happens twice. Okay. So in producing egg cells, the cell splits twice going through each of those phases. So in interphase, as we remember from mitosis, this is the resting stage when the cell's not actively dividing, and this is when the chromosomes and the genetic material replicates. So that's the same. So in the process of meiosis, the first time that the cell divides, the chromosomes line up with each other in a different way. So if you remember in mitosis, the chromosomes lined up single file. In meiosis, the chromosomes don't line up single file. They line up with their partner chromosomes, what we call the homologous pair of chromosomes. Okay. That process is called synapsis. And so here what you see are two homologous chromosomes that have aligned themselves together. Okay. So these two chromosomes, they are similar to each other. That's why they're called homologous. They contain the same sort of genetic information. They have alleles for the similar traits, but they're not necessarily identical. One of these chromosomes was inherited from the mother, and one was inherited from the father, but they are similar chromosomes. And so they line up with their homologous partners. And when they do that, there's something that can happen. So this group of two homologous chromosomes is formed from four what we call sister chromatids. So here, this blue chromosome has two sister chromatids. They are identical to each other. So we just talked about when the DNA replicates, one sister chromatid is copied to form another sister chromatid. These two are identical. These two are identical. But this chromosome are not identical. They're just homologous. They're similar to each other. And when the chromosomes line up in this way, in this tetrad as it's called, something can happen. What can happen is these two chromosomes that are lined up next to each other, these homologous chromosomes, can swap pieces. What you see here, this red chromosome and the blue chromosome swapped the ends here. That process is called crossing over. It's a really important source of variation in organisms that reproduce sexually because we've sort of mixed the chromosomes together a little bit. Okay? And that process results in some genetic variation. After these chromosomes line up in tetrads, the tetrads get split apart in metaphase. Okay, so metaphase, they line up. Chromosomes are attached to spindle fibers, and then in anaphase, the two homologous chromosomes get separated from each other. I don't want to do that. Okay. Technical difficulty there. So after the spindle fiber attaches to each of the homologous chromosomes, they get pulled apart from each other. They head towards opposite ends of the cell. And then eventually the cell splits in two during telophase. New nuclear membrane forms around each set of chromosomes. Okay, so this is the first metaphase, the first division. And you can see the names of the phases are listed up there. We usually put a Roman numeral 1 after them. So this is meiosis 1. Chromosomes lined up with each other, okay, with their homologous partners. Crossing over happened. The spindle fibers have pulled these chromosomes apart, okay, but you can see homologous chromosomes are getting split up here. After that, those new cells that were produced, those two cells, go through a process of another division. And this second division happens just like mitosis. Okay, those daughter cells that came from meiosis 1, now they each have half the number of chromosomes. Those chromosomes line up in the middle of the cell, single file, because they no longer have a partner. They line up on the equator of the cell. Chromosomes, the sister chromatids, separate from each other, get pulled to opposite ends of the cell. Eventually, a new nuclear membrane forms. So let's look at that process here. So here's our original parent cell. We can see it has 4 chromosomes, 2 blue ones, 2 red ones. During interphase, each of these would copy itself to form double-stranded chromosomes that we see here. This would be prophase 1. These homologous chromosomes match up with their partner during synapsis, and then those homologous partners got pulled apart from each other and formed these two cells. We can see now those chromosomes line up single file down the equator, get pulled apart, and each of these will form two cells. So if we look at what we start with, we have a cell with 4 chromosomes in it. The end result after meiosis is complete, we have 4 cells, but they each have 2 chromosomes in them. The number of chromosomes have been reduced in half. We've gone from diploid parent cell to 4 haploid daughter cells. They have half the number of chromosomes. These are the cells that would be destined to be gametes, sex cells, reproductive cells. So here we see meiosis 2, the second division. Again, these are the chromosomes we had previously. They align themselves along the equator. You can see crossing over has happened. Pieces of those chromosomes have been exchanged. They get split apart into individual sister chromatids, pulled to opposite ends of the cells, and again we're going to end up with 4 cells, each of which have half the number of chromosomes. Now, if we talk about sexual reproduction, things are a little bit different in producing sperm cells versus producing egg cells. So meiosis is responsible for producing both sperm and egg cells. Sperm and egg cells have half the number of chromosomes. They're haploid cells. So let's look at the production of sperm cells. In males, the original diploid germ cell, it's called, goes through the process of meiosis here. Splits into 2 cells. They each split into 2 cells. 1 cell is split into 4. These 4 sperm cells are haploid cells. They eventually develop a flagellum, which they need to swim to reach the egg cell during reproduction. If we look at this other side, however, to produce egg cells, things work a little differently. Again, the cell that's undergoing meiosis, it goes through meiosis, but then when the cell divides the first time, it divides unequally. The vast majority of the cytoplasm ends up in one cell, and the other cell that produces a tiny little part called the polar body. Then these cells divide again. Again, the cytoplasm is divided unequally. One cell ends up with most of the cytoplasm and organelles. The other one is a small little polar body. These polar bodies actually just sort of dissolve. These will not become viable egg cells. So when a cell goes through meiosis to produce an egg cell, it actually produces a single egg cell. Whereas in males, one cell undergoes meiosis and produces 4 sperm cells. Sperm cells are specially adapted. They have mitochondria to provide energy to move the flagellum so that they can swim to reach the egg cell during fertilization. So if we just have a general comparison of meiosis and mitosis, put myself here. Again, mitosis is used in asexual reproduction or for growth and repair of multicellular organisms. Meiosis only happens to produce sex cells, only happens in animals, in the testes and the ovaries. In humans, that's the only place where meiosis takes place. Every other part of the body, new cells are produced through mitosis. Another difference, what happens to the chromosome number? Mitosis takes diploid cells and produces more diploid cells. In meiosis, diploid cells are transformed into haploid cells that have half the number of chromosomes. In mitosis, the chromosomes never line up with their homologous partners, therefore there's no synapsis, no tetrads, there's no crossing over. all of those things do happen in meiosis. During the first division, during metaphase 1, homologous chromosomes partner up, and that's when crossing over can take place. The cells produced through mitosis have very little variation. They're basically identical copies of each other. Cells produced in meiosis result in greater variation because of crossing over, and because they are only getting half of the number of chromosomes, each of those cells is unique. Finally, the number of daughter cells. Mitosis yields 2 daughter cells, which are identical to the parent cell. Meiosis yields 4 daughter cells. In sperm production, spermatogenesis, all 4 of them become sperm cells. In oogenesis, producing egg cells, actually only 1 will eventually turn into a viable egg cell. So that's how mitosis and meiosis compare. Okay, so that's it. You're going to watch a video about meiosis. You're also going to be completing a POGL activity that'll help to reinforce some of these ideas. Once we go over some of those things, we'll be moving on talking about human reproduction.